I thought I had everything figured out when I turned 18. College acceptance letters were rolling in, my grades were stellar, and my parents had been setting aside money for my education since I was born. Life felt perfect sitting in our cozy Arizona home, planning my future with excitement bubbling in my chest. My family had always been my biggest supporters, and I trusted them completely. But sometimes the people closest to you can shatter your world in ways you never imagined possible. Trefore kitoi ke kauchuyen nai hai chotoi biet banjang sem tu jaun he jungquen han like va subscribe je kong bolon hung kauchuyen joy thuk kat. Boy vi kauchuyen toi sapchia se sekien banthe joy kachen hin veran gioi trongia jin. My name is Natalia, and growing up in our 2-story house in Arizona, I always felt like the luckiest kid in the world. My dad Michael worked as an engineer at a local tech company, while my mom Patricia taught 4th grade at the elementary school just down the street. We were not wealthy by any means, but we were comfortable living in a middle-class neighborhood where kids rode bikes until sunset, and neighbors knew each other by name. My older sister Samantha was 4 years ahead of me, and I looked up to her in every way possible. She had already graduated from college with a degree in marketing and landed a great job at a digital advertising firm downtown. Samantha was everything I aspired to be: confident, successful, and completely put together. She drove a sleek Honda Civic and always seemed to have her life mapped out perfectly. From the time I could understand what college meant, my parents talked about my education fund. Every month without fail, Dad would transfer money into a special savings account that was meant to cover my tuition, books, and living expenses. They called it my future fund, and it became this sacred thing in our household. When I had good report cards, Mom would remind me that every A was an investment in that fund. When I struggled with calculus, Dad would sit with me at the kitchen table and say, "This is preparing you for your college courses, sweetheart." During my senior year of high school, I was accepted to the University of California with plans to major in business administration. The acceptance letter felt like pure magic in my hands, and my parents celebrated like I had just won the lottery. We spent countless evenings at the dinner table discussing dorm life meal plans and which textbooks I would need. The estimated cost came to around $60,000 for 4 years, but my parents assured me repeatedly that the fund would cover everything. To help with personal expenses, I picked up a part-time job at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind. Working there taught me responsibility and gave me pocket money for movies and clothes shopping with friends. The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, always scheduled me around my school commitments, and I loved the routine of steaming milk and chatting with regular customers. Every paycheck felt like a small step toward independence, even though I knew my major expenses were already handled. The sense of security I felt was unshakable. My parents had sacrificed for years to make sure I could pursue my dreams without the burden of student debt that plagued so many of my classmates. When friends complained about having to choose cheaper schools or worry about loans, I felt incredibly grateful. My family had always prioritized education, and I was the living proof of their commitment. Everything changed in March of my senior year when Samantha came home with sparkling eyes and news that sent our household into a frenzy of excitement. She had been dating Tyler for nearly 2 years, a charming guy who worked at an investment firm and came from a well-off family in California. That evening she gathered us all in the living room and announced their engagement with a diamond ring that caught the light like a tiny disco ball. Mom immediately started crying happy tears, and Dad bear-hugged Tyler so hard I thought he might crack a rib. The energy in our house shifted overnight from college planning mode to wedding planning mode. Samantha wanted to get married in August, right before I started my freshman year, which seemed like perfect timing to everyone. I was thrilled to be chosen as her maid of honor and threw myself into helping her research venues, flowers, and dress styles. The first hints that something was wrong came in May, just 2 months before graduation. I started noticing hushed conversations between my parents that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. One evening while doing homework in the kitchen, I overheard Mom mention something about the college account during what sounded like a tense discussion with Dad. Their voices were lower than usual, and there was an edge of worry that I had never heard before. Around the same time, Samantha began talking more frequently about wedding expenses. The venue she wanted cost $30,000, and catering for their guest list was adding up faster than anyone had anticipated. I noticed Dad looked stressed whenever these conversations came up, running his hands through his hair in a way that usually meant he was solving complex problems at work. Mom started making more budget-conscious choices for our regular household shopping, switching to generic brands and clipping coupons with unusual dedication. Despite these small warning signs, I pushed my concerns aside. My parents had always been responsible with money, and I trusted them completely. The college fund had been building for 18 years. Surely a wedding, no matter how elaborate, would not affect my education money. I was probably just overthinking things because of normal senior year anxiety about leaving home and starting college. At the end of June, with graduation behind me and college just 2 months away, I finally asked Dad about accessing the college fund to complete my enrollment paperwork. I needed to submit final tuition payments and housing deposits, and the deadlines were approaching quickly. When I brought up the topic over breakfast, both of my parents suddenly became very interested in their scrambled eggs, avoiding eye contact in a way that made my stomach drop. Dad cleared his throat several times before speaking, which was always a sign that he was about to deliver difficult news. "Natalia, we need to talk about your college fund," he said, and the words hung in the air like smoke. Mom reached over and squeezed his hand, which only made the knot in my stomach tighten further. "We had to use some of the money for Samantha's wedding." The word "some" turned out to be a massive understatement. When Dad finally revealed the actual numbers, I learned that only $8,000 remained in an account that was supposed to contain nearly $60,000. The majority of my education fund had been transferred to pay for wedding expenses that had spiraled far beyond anyone's original budget. My future had been traded for one day of celebration. The wedding details, when laid out, completely painted a picture of excess that made my head spin. Samantha had chosen a luxury resort venue in Napa Valley that cost $45,000 just for the location rental. Her designer wedding dress carried a price tag of $5,000 more than I had earned in an entire year at the coffee shop. The guest list had grown to 200 people, and catering alone was costing $28,000. Tyler's family had contributed some money, but they expected my parents to cover the majority of expenses as the bride's family. Photography, floral arrangements, and live music added another $15,000 to the total. When I calculated everything in my head, the wedding was costing more than my entire 4-year college education was supposed to cost. My initial reaction was complete shock, followed by a disbelief so profound that I questioned whether I was hearing correctly. "What about my education? What about my future?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange and distant even to my own ears. The kitchen suddenly felt like a foreign place, even though I had eaten breakfast at that same table for 18 years. Dad and Mom immediately became defensive, throwing out justifications faster than I could process them. "You can always take out student loans," Dad said, as if this was a perfectly reasonable solution that had always been the plan. "Samantha only gets married once," Mom added. "College is an investment that you will eventually pay back anyway." The words hit me like physical blows. In that moment, I realized that my education was being treated as less important than my sister's wedding. My dreams and my future were being classified as something I could figure out on my own, while Samantha's celebration was deemed worthy of the family's entire financial commitment. The betrayal was complete and devastating. I confronted Samantha directly that same day, marching into her bedroom, where she was addressing wedding invitations with perfect calligraphy. When I explained what I had just learned, she looked up from her work with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I was interrupting something far more important than my entire future. "I did not ask them to use your money," she said with a shrug, "but families should support each other during important times." Her casualness about the situation felt like salt in an open wound. She went back to writing invitations as if we had just discussed weekend plans instead of the destruction of my college dreams. When I brought my concerns back to my parents, hoping they would somehow fix this disaster, they sided completely with Samantha. "Stop being selfish," Mom said sharply. "This is an important family event and we all need to make sacrifices." Dad nodded in agreement, adding that I was being dramatic and that plenty of students managed to pay for college through loans and part-time work. Standing in our living room surrounded by the people who were supposed to love and protect me most, I felt utterly alone. The family that had raised me to value education and hard work had just proven that those values disappeared when something more exciting came along. The trust I had built over 18 years crumbled in the space of a single conversation. With less than 2 months before college started, I had to completely reimagine my future. The $8,000 that remained in my fund would not even cover 1 semester of tuition, let alone 4 years of education. While my family continued planning centerpieces and menu tastings, I threw myself into researching student loan options, with the desperate energy of someone whose dreams were slipping away. I applied for every federal loan program available and researched private lenders that offered reasonable interest rates. The paperwork was overwhelming and the total debt I was taking on felt astronomical. By the time I calculated everything, I would graduate with approximately $75,000 in student loan debt, assuming I could find enough funding to complete all 4 years. Working extra shifts at the daily grind became my obsession. I picked up every available hour working early morning shifts before school and long weekend shifts that left me exhausted, but slightly less panicked about money. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed my increased dedication and offered me additional responsibilities, which came with a small raise that felt like a lifeline. I also spent countless hours applying for last-minute scholarships, writing essay after essay about my goals and financial need. Most application deadlines had already passed, but I found a few smaller scholarship programs that were still accepting submissions. Eventually, I received a partial scholarship that covered about 15% of my tuition, which felt like a miracle, even though it was not nearly enough. The emotional weight of the situation became unbearable. I made the decision to move out of the house a month before college started, staying with my best friend Emma and her family. Emma's parents had watched me grow up and were horrified when they learned about my situation. They offered me their guest bedroom and refused to accept any money for food or utilities despite my insistence on contributing something. During those final weeks before leaving for college, I had minimal contact with my family. Samantha's wedding planning continued at full speed, and social media was filled with engagement photos, bridal shower pictures, and constant updates about dress fittings and cake tastings. Watching this celebration of luxury funded by my stolen future felt like picking at a wound that refused to heal. My freshman year at UC was defined by financial struggle in ways that my classmates could not understand. While they worried about roommate conflicts and fraternity parties, I worked 25 hours per week between a work-study program in the library and weekend shifts at a local restaurant near campus. My schedule was relentless: classes during the day, studying in the evening, and work filling every available gap. My diet consisted mainly of ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free food I could find at campus events. I shopped exclusively at thrift stores and learned to repair clothes instead of replacing them. While other students joined clubs and attended social events, I was always working or studying, trying to maintain my grades despite being exhausted constantly. The social isolation was almost as difficult as the financial pressure. I could not afford to grab coffee with classmates or attend movies and concerts that were normal parts of the college experience. When friends invited me to spring break trips or weekend getaways, I had to decline repeatedly until they stopped asking. My world became very small, consisting only of work classes and my tiny dorm room. From a distance, I watched Samantha's wedding unfold through social media posts that felt like daggers to my heart. The ceremony looked absolutely beautiful, with perfect weather-stunning photography and every detail executed flawlessly. The reception featured live music, elaborate floral arrangements, and a 5-course dinner that probably cost more per plate than I spent on food in an entire month. Despite all the challenges, I was determined to succeed. My grades remained strong, though not quite as stellar as they had been in high school when I could focus exclusively on academics. Every assignment felt like a step toward proving that I could build a future, despite being abandoned by the people who should have supported me most. By my junior year, my relentless work ethic began paying off in unexpected ways. A professor recommended me for an internship at a growing tech startup, where I impressed my supervisors enough to be offered a part-time position during my senior year. The company culture valued hard work and innovation over connections and family money, which felt like a perfect fit for someone who had learned to depend only on herself. Graduation day arrived with a mix of pride and exhaustion that I had never experienced before. Walking across that stage to receive my business administration degree felt like climbing a mountain that everyone said was impossible to climb. My student loan debt had reached the projected $75,000, but I had a job offer waiting and a sense of accomplishment that nobody could take away from me. The tech startup offered me a full-time position with a starting salary of $45,000, which felt like incredible wealth after 4 years of scraping by on almost nothing. I moved to Seattle, Washington, drawn by the city's energy and the opportunity to build a completely new life far away from the family dynamics that had caused so much pain. Working in the technology industry suited my personality perfectly. The fast-paced environment rewarded creativity, problem-solving skills, and the kind of determination that I had developed during my difficult college years. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice, and my salary had grown to $85,000 annually, a figure that would have seemed impossible during those ramen noodle days. Living in Seattle also provided the distance I needed to heal from the betrayal I had experienced. I built new friendships with coworkers and neighbors who knew me as simply Natalia, the hard-working marketing manager who was always willing to stay late on important projects. They had no knowledge of college fund theft or wedding drama, and I preferred it that way. My relationship with my family during those years was minimal and strained. We exchanged brief text messages on birthdays and holidays, but there were no real conversations or attempts to rebuild trust. I sent a graduation announcement but did not invite them to the ceremony. When I got promoted, I shared the news with Emma's family instead of my own, because they were the ones who had actually supported me when it mattered. I used every extra dollar to pay down my student loans, aggressively living in a small apartment and maintaining the frugal habits I had developed during college. Watching that debt number shrink each month felt like reclaiming pieces of my stolen future one payment at a time. By 2019, I had paid off over half of the original loan balance and built an emergency savings account that gave me real financial security for the first time since high school. Then, in the fall of 2019, my carefully constructed life of independence was interrupted by a phone call that changed everything. The number on my caller ID was my childhood home, and I stared at it for several rings before deciding to answer. Mom's voice on the other end was shaky and desperate in a way that I had never heard before. The news she delivered painted a picture of complete financial collapse. Dad had lost his engineering job when his company downsized, and at 53 years old he was struggling to find new employment in an increasingly competitive market. Mom's teacher salary alone was not enough to cover their mortgage payments, and they were facing foreclosure on the house where I had grown up. The situation was made worse by Samantha's recent divorce from Tyler. Their marriage had lasted only 3 years before falling apart, and Tyler had kept most of their shared assets when they separated. Samantha had moved back into my parents' house with significant credit card debt and no savings, adding to the family's financial burden rather than helping to solve it. "We need $25,000 to save the house," Mom explained through tears. "You are doing so well now, and you are our daughter. Please help us." The desperation in her voice was real, and I could hear Dad crying in the background, which was something I had never witnessed in my entire life. Listening to my mother's pleas for financial help, I felt remarkably calm. The panic and emotional turmoil that might have overwhelmed me years earlier was replaced by a clear-headed assessment of the situation. I had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to risk my own financial stability for people who had shown no concern for mine when I needed them most. "You can always take out loans," I said, using the exact words Dad had spoken to me 5 years earlier. "That is what you told me when I needed help paying for college. I am sure there are programs available for people in your situation." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for what felt like minutes. When Mom finally spoke again, her voice was filled with shock and disbelief. "But we are family. This is different. We raised you and sacrificed for you your entire life." Her words might have affected me once, but now they just sounded like manipulation from people who were reaping what they had sown. My education was a family matter too, I replied, but you chose to prioritize Samantha's wedding over my future. You taught me that family members are responsible for solving their own financial problems. Samantha called me later that same week, using the same tone of voice she had used to dismiss my concerns about the college fund. She accused me of being heartless and selfish, pointing out that they were facing genuine hardship while I was living comfortably in Seattle. The irony was completely lost on her. "Family should stick together during hard times," she said, recycling the same phrase she had used to justify taking my education money. When I pointed out this contradiction, she became angry and accused me of holding grudges over something that had happened years ago. According to her logic, I was supposed to forget about their betrayal, but remember my obligations to help them. The conversation with Samantha confirmed that my family had learned nothing from their experience. They still believed that my resources existed to solve their problems, while their resources were their own, to spend however they chose. The entitlement was breathtaking, and it reinforced my decision to maintain firm boundaries. My family ultimately lost their house and moved into a smaller apartment across town. Extended family members who learned about the situation were divided in their opinions. Some relatives supported my decision to protect my own financial future, while others criticized me for abandoning family during their time of need. The gossip and judgment were uncomfortable, but they did not shake my resolve. In the months that followed, I experienced a complex mix of sadness and liberation. I was genuinely sad to see my parents struggling, especially Dad, who had always been a hard worker and did not deserve to lose his job. However, I also felt freed from the guilt and obligation that had weighed on me since the college fund betrayal. Building healthy boundaries with my family required ongoing effort and occasional reminders about my position. When they attempted to use holidays or family events as leverage to guilt me into providing money, I politely declined to participate. When flying monkeys in the form of well-meaning relatives called to advocate on my parents' behalf, I explained my position once, and then ended the conversation. My life in Seattle continued to flourish as I focused on my own goals and relationships. I began dating again, something I had put on hold during the intense years of debt repayment and career building. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see, using money that I had earned through my own hard work, rather than family connections or inherited wealth. The experience taught me invaluable lessons about the difference between family and people who happen to share your DNA. Real family members support each other's dreams and make sacrifices to help each other succeed. People who steal your future while calling it love are something else entirely, and recognizing that difference was essential to my emotional health. I also learned that financial independence is about much more than having money in the bank. True independence means having the freedom to make choices based on your own values, rather than other people's expectations. It means being able to say no to unreasonable demands without fear of abandonment or retaliation. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the consequences of their own choices. My parents' financial crisis was the direct result of their decision to prioritize short-term celebration over long-term planning. Rescuing them would have enabled them to continue making poor decisions while punishing me for their mistakes. As I reflect on this journey now, I feel profound gratitude for the strength I discovered during those difficult college years. The struggle taught me resilience, self-reliance, and the value of every dollar I earn. These lessons shaped me into someone who cannot be easily taken advantage of or manipulated through false guilt. The relationship with my family remains distant but cordial. We exchange holiday cards and brief updates about major life events, but there is no real intimacy or trust. This sadness is something I have learned to live with, understanding that some bridges cannot be rebuilt once they have been burned by betrayal. I often wonder what kind of relationship we might have had if they had made different choices 5 years ago. If they had found another way to pay for Samantha's wedding or chosen a more modest celebration that fit within their actual budget, we might still be close today. Their decision to steal my future created a wound that time alone cannot heal. Sometimes the people who teach us our most valuable lessons are the ones who break our trust first. And sometimes the best thing you can give someone is exactly what they once gave you: absolutely nothing. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had family members prioritize someone else's wants over your actual needs? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the complicated dynamics of family relationships, and share this with someone who might need to hear about setting healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate whatever family challenges you might be facing. Remember, you deserve people in your life who celebrate your dreams instead of stealing them.